Welcome back to our podcast. I'm Grayson.
I'm Dominic.
I'm Caleb, and this is Fireside Friday Nights.
So, you may have heard from the intro that Isaiah isn't with us this week, but we still plan to discuss another controversial topic in the news these days, which is climate change. So, before we get into it, make sure that you like the episode, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and wherever you get your podcast, and turn on notifications. Okay, boys, let's discuss climate change. First of all, what are your base thoughts on climate change and global warming? As they would say, quote unquote, a crisis.
I don't think it's a crisis, but I think we should pay attention to it. Like, we should understand what it is, what affects it, and then, I guess what we can do with it. And in my opinion, the question I'll ask you is it effective? Is global warming an issue?
Caleb, do you have anything to say? Otherwise,
Well, I guess my viewpoint on it would be it does happen, I think, but I think it's overhyped a lot more than it really should be. I think people talk about it and care about it way more than it actually affects the earth and stuff.
I personally think that climate change. So climate change and global warming, I think the terms are synonymous, but they changed the term more to climate change, which is, and as we post this video, this will happen because Google's community notes will put a little thing below our video to specify what climate change is, so that if we say something wrong, it's not true. But Google would say, climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. There, they say climate change when they say long-term shifts in temperatures. I think it's funny how they changed their shift in their viewpoint from global warming to climate change, where they can say, oh, well, the temperature's going down. Must be climate change. Oh, the temperature's going up. Must be climate change. Me personally, the only climate change I believe in is winter, spring, summer, fall.
That's what it is climate change is exactly what it's called, climate change. And what we should be talking about is actual global warming.
Well, either way, I don't think either one is truly an actual threat or even necessarily exist in the first place. I feel that our Earth functions the way God created it to, and that is how it's going to function until the end of eternity, or until the world is ended. Because us as humans, yes, we're placed here. We are God's creation. God's Earth is God's creation, so we respect God's creation because He created it as good. However, therefore, that being said, we're not just going to go around and start wildfires and just rip plants out of the ground and stuff like that. But I don't think that us living our lives as humans is destroying the earth. We know from the Bible how the earth is going to be destroyed. As 2 Peter 3:10 says, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17 says, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command and with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive will be left together, and who are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so will be with the Lord forever. I mean, that talks about the destruction of the earth at the end times, but I don't think us as humans are going to destroy the earth. The earth's going to be destroyed when God decides that the final time is going to come. So, if we want to talk, since we're on that topic, we'll talk about the earth getting warmer. How much do you guys know, or how much have you guys heard, or any theories, I guess, about, the ice caps melting, sea levels rising, etc., etc.?
So, I know my dad has this theory. So, it's that, so this is per se. So, in the beginning, when God created the earth, right, it happened that the earth was how it's tilted just a little bit, that it used to be straight, and then there was a comet that came and struck just the top of the earth, and that tilted it, causing the changes to be extreme. And the comet was cold, it gets really cold, and I think it froze the top portion of the Earth, and that's where the Ice Age happened. And then, as like you can see, I think they believe that this like glacier, right? It like moved across the top of the Earth and like scraped the ground, and so you can see all the like markings into the ground and stuff. When the glacier moved, that's how like Antarctica was born, I guess. I don't know, but so that explains Ice Age, and then that explains our tilt. Well, and they're saying so over the years. So obviously,
This is your dad's theory, right? Okay.
Well, and then I also think I think it's a theory from somewhere else. I can't remember, but I know my dad said something about it. That it's so the comet struck the top of the Earth, making it tilt and then wobble like a top. So like, you know how you spin a top, right? And then you knock it over and it wobbles.
Yeah.
Well, if it's spinning fast enough, which the Earth is that once it wobbles, it'll kind of try to redirect itself.
Equilibrium.
Yeah. So that's what they're doing. And I think the evidence points back is that the Earth, like if you trace back the years, the Earth, it would wobble even more and more as you go back in history. Anyone can take a look at this. I don't know. And then, so if we play that back to today, it's slowly going back to normal, which explains the warming. Because when it first started, it was cold, Ice Age, and now it's slowly progressing to be warming.
Okay, where's our first of all? Okay, I have like 3 million problems with that.
Yeah, same.
Okay, so first of all, so he's saying that the change of seasons was not created by God. It was a comet that. Well, I mean, say God created the comet. We'll say that. But he's saying that the comet was not, or that seasons were not originally in God's plan. Or
no, I don't think so. I think that's not what he's saying. Is that seasons were?
But the tilt
not a
of the
thing.
Earth is what gives us seasons. If the Earth was tilted afterwards, also, why do we have ice caps on both sides of the Earth? Were they hit by 2 comets at the exact same time that froze the
No.
Earth? And then the Ice Age, I don't even know how much collective proof do we have of the Ice Age. I don't even know.
Well, I think, me personally, I do believe there was an Ice Age. It would have.
I think
had
at
to
some
happen.
point, yeah.
It would have been directly after the flood because, like all the fountains of the deep and stuff, that's probably underwater volcanoes and stuff. And all the ash and all the heat that would have came out of the volcanoes would have eventually cooled the atmosphere and the oceans and created those like ice land bridges over the continents in like the North Pole. And that's how I think that like people got over to North America. Like that's what they say. People got over from North America, but scientists will say, like, all that time ago. I think after the flood and after like the Tower of Babel and stuff, that's how they got to North America was over those ice caps from the Ice Age that would have happened because of the flood.
I possibly think that, I think that's plausible. I also believe that Pangea, like the Earth's still forming after the flood, like waters went down, and the Earth's still moving, because what written history do we say that the Earth doesn't move? Like, I mean, we don't have any written proof that Pangea exists. It's just like maps and geological excavations from fossils that we found. And just like if you look at the Earth, it looks like it fits together.
So here's an actual question. Does like landmass float?
No, it's rooted to the ground.
Okay.
It's just different plates in the Earth's crust
that are pushed out
shift around.
past sea level.
Okay.
So, okay. So, I mean, back to your theory that you were talking about. So the glacier movie. So, whatever this comet theory is, I do not think that that's right or that's true.
It might be just something that I heard over somewhere. I just
Well, I mean, we recorded that one episode that we took the stuff out. We're like, sometimes we were just about talking about your dad, and we're like, sometimes I've heard theories that, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But that one with like the comet and stuff, I believe that the seasons were created meticulously so through God's providence that he chose that that's how the Earth was going to function. It wasn't some fluke thing through a comet that like hit our Earth that changed the trajectory, that made it wobble, that changed the way that the seasons work. Because do you remember? I don't remember what was the other stuff that you had said about. You said that it caused an ice bridge. You said the glacier moved.
No, that would, well, yeah, it created this ice cap, I guess, and then I don't know how it moved, but I think the evidence is that there's like gashes in the ground and the landmass, and that could be also evidence towards the flood as well.
That's what I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
If you have like water poured into mud, if there's enough water there, and you have motion of the fountains of the deep, right? Like if you stirred around with a stick, the dirt's gonna change.
Yeah, it's called erosion.
It's gonna move around. I think the entire face of the Bible says the face of the earth was changed after the flood. So I feel that any like movement of plates in the earth happened as course of the flood, not because of some comet. Because I wonder, I don't have no idea what theory you're speaking of, but
Yeah, me neither.
if the comet thing is like, if they say that's how the dinosaurs were, like, I have no idea what.
No, honestly, I think actually there is a theory of that is the dinosaurs actually still exist, just in like smaller forms.
Lizards.
I have heard
Yeah.
the thing about how like greenhouse gases, which we will speak about in this episode,
Yeah.
and talking about how lizards can keep growing, but like they just can't now because of like certain conditions. Because like talking about people who I don't know. I think I could believe it if it never rained before the flood and like the water barrier between the sky. I don't know, but what was I gonna say? I was talking to your dad one time, and he was talking about how in Antarctica they found trees, and that's how he was trying to prove. He's like, there's trees under the Antarctica, so it was like the comet thing. What I would say to that is, if the tectonic plates moved after the flood, Pangea, there's land under Antarctica. It's not just like ice floating in the middle of nowhere. It's land. It's just cold because of how the Earth is tilted. That makes their seasons change, and it's cold on both the poles. So if that's the case, if this Earth had moved and they found these plates that are frozen because they're under the ground or under the ice, that would make sense. That would make perfectly logical historical sense, according to the flood.
All right, I can see a point there.
Okay. Something else that we could talk about then. Moving from global warming, just talking about like sea levels rising. One thing I want to pull up real quick is I had a tweet from Mike at NC Session on Twitter. And he says, "It seems like y'all for some reason are trying to slam George W. Bush. I simply ask y'all to recall this that his opponent was Al Gore, the original global warming," and then he uses a word that I'm not going to say on air. But it shows this picture of the unprecedented climate change has caused the sea level at Sydney Harbor to rise approximately 0.0 centimeters over the past 140 years. And it shows a picture from 140, literally the exact same picture. It almost looks like the sea level has in fact gone down in the picture that he shows. But, and speaking of Al Gore, I had one other one. The self-proclaimed climate expert who was running for president, but he says, so this was in 2005, Al Gore said, "Within a decade, there will be no more snow on top of Kilimanjaro. Meanwhile, 2024, more snow than there was in 2005. So moving into the more climate change and global warming prevention that is talked about in the media and in our culture today. First of all, what do you guys have to say about climate change, like in prevention? So, like, do we think it's an actual issue to prevent, and do we think it's being taken out of context or out of proportion to what it should actually be controlled as?
Yeah, I think, well, Caleb, you said that they're like exploding what it actually is, right?
What do you mean?
Like what
Blowing it out of proportion?
Yeah, like what it is compared to what they're talking about.
Well, I mean, like, people are talking about it way more and taking it way too seriously, I think.
Yeah.
But I will say that there are certain chemical molecules that are actually very bad for the environment, whether you like believing in climate change or not. Like, the big example is CFCs, and so that's just like carbon, chlorine, and fluorine in a molecule. And so going into some chemistry stuff here, in the atmosphere, there is a layer called the ozone layer. And ozone is just O3, so 3 molecules or 3 atoms of oxygen in a single molecule. And so O3 is thicker than O2 because it's got more atoms in it, and it actually protects us from UV radiation from the sun. So because of the ozone layer, we are pretty safe to walk outside here on Earth. If we didn't have an ozone layer, we would kind of just fry, and that would not be very good for us. So the ozone layer is very important, and the thing CFCs do is that the chlorine atom from the CFC breaks off and then binds to the O3 atom and then splits off one oxygen from that O3, creating just like this oxygen just flying around everywhere, and then an O2 molecule, which just becomes part of air. And so the air is fine. Like, we breathe it in. It's good for us. But that's less ozone that's protecting us. But it's not all bad, because that oxygen that's just floating around will combine with other oxygens in the atmosphere to create more O3 over time. It's just, it takes a while.
Okay, so going along with that, so yeah, I 100% agree that it's a good practice to not use CFCs. So the other thing, though, if there's holes in the ozone layer, the heat's coming in more, we'll say, the UV radiation, then the other chemistry lesson here is CO2 emissions, which, as a greenhouse gas, lock in the heat or keep the radiation, the heat, inside the Earth so that it is warmer or feels warmer on the Earth, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it basically, the UV goes through the ozone layer,
Yep.
and then it's like a double shield almost. You have the ozone layer on top, and then you have the CO2 layer on the bottom, and then you have the Earth on the absolute
Just like our
bottom.
atmosphere to like breathe in.
Yeah. And then the UV passes through the 2 layers and then heats up the Earth, and the Earth.
To bounce back.
Yeah, and the heat tries to get out of the Earth. Well, it can't because the CO2 is capturing it.
Or
Yep.
can't as much.
Just
yeah.
all the greenhouse gases, not just CO2, but that's the most common one.
Yeah.
So many businesses, or here, actually, I guess I'll move into this. Many businesses and corporations and governments these days are trying to. The big move is lower CO2 emissions. So in 2015, the Paris Agreement was. Or the Paris Accords. So the Paris Agreement was a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties at the UN Climate Change Conference. And when Trump was in office, he kicked us out, or he removed us from the Paris Agreement and moved our funding from that towards sustainable movements in our own country. So yes, he got us out of the UN movement together, but he didn't necessarily take us completely out of funding for climate change prevention, which I feel like it is kind of I feel like climate change could be just a giant cash grab. I actually had this is from Our World in Data. They had a chart that showed I'll read it off here. Predicted share of population willing to give 1% of their income towards climate change prevention, and the actual share who said they'd be willing to give 1% of their income towards climate change prevention. So on the low end, Egypt was predicted to give, or 24% of Egyptians were predicted to share to give 1% of their income. Meanwhile, they in reality had 30% that pledged, and on the high end of the spectrum, Myanmar was predicted to give 60%. Well, the actual share who said they would was 92%. And U.S. is at like the low end where they said 34% were predicted, while 48% said they would. I feel like it is just a giant cash grab by the government. But hey, what can I say?
What isn't these days?
Yeah, I mean, the moment I saw this tweet, it was like, the moment you start realizing that the government isn't necessarily there for your good is the day you start seeing clearly. And I don't think that's necessarily far off. Here's another chart they have. A share of people who support policies to tackle climate change. And it's just pictures. The country who is the most supporting of climate change stuff is Turkey, which is about 80-90%. Meanwhile, a lot of the EU countries are about like 75%. The United States is sitting at 68%. Brazil, 78%. Canada, 72%. Australia 72, China 76. What else do we have here? Share of people who say their government should do more to tackle climate change. The highest is all of South America at like 93, 98, 95, 97%. Mexico 96. America's only at 74. China is at 97. Mongolia 93. A lot of the Western North African countries are in the high numbers. Russia's sitting pretty low at 79.
I find it pretty funny that China is big about preventing climate change.
That's
when,
the people, though.
Yeah, but they're still using CFCs, and I haven't heard much about the people trying to stop stuff like that.
I don't know how much we can talk about China in a podcast on the internet, but how much does China censor their media between people, though? Like, do people even know?
I'm not sure.
Another article that I had was from procon.org, which is, I guess you could say nonpartisan source because they show the pros and the cons between debate points. So they have their pros for overwhelming scientific consensus finds human activity primarily responsible for climate change. Over 90% of climate scientists agree that human activity is extremely likely to be the cause. And then the con, many scientists disagree that human activity is responsible. And then over 1,000 scientists disagreed that humans are primarily responsible.
Did you say they disagree?
Over 1,000 said they disagreed. And then it says 90% of climate scientists. So I mean 3% of climate scientists believe that humans aren't the problem. And this is just saying 1,000 scientists in general. So if you're a climate scientist, obviously you're going to believe that the whole case of your study is real, right? I mean, yeah. That's what I would think. Then it talks about CO2 stuff. So rising levels in human-produced gases released into the atmosphere create a greenhouse effect that traps heat and causes global warming. The con, Earth's climate has always warmed and cooled in the 20th century, and the 20th century rise in global temperature is within the bounds of natural temperature fluctuations over the past 3,000 years. And I would agree with that. I think that because they changed the term to climate change to show they said increase and decrease over time. I believe that these are just normal Earth fluctuation. We're not causing any of this. Actually, I was talking to one of my farmer friends, and he was telling me about he was at this pig convention, and he had seen they were talking about climate change because they have to talk about like the environment and stuff at this pig convention, and they were saying that the level of carbon in the air is only a tiny bit, a fraction bit higher than it's ever been before. And the average temperature that it sits at is actually less than, if it goes any lower than it averagely sits at, plants could die. I'll read just a quote he had sent me. He said, the current level is 0.04%. So think about how small it is of the Earth's atmosphere.
Earth's atmosphere is actually pretty large, too, when you think about it. But, yeah, it's pretty small in comparison to the whole ratio of the atmosphere.
It has risen from 0.03% over the past few decades. At 0.02%, plant life begins to die.
Wow.
So if we take too much of it out of the air, the plants are going to die, which in turn, animals and invertebrates who actually need the plants to survive are going to die because they can't get food. Here's another thing. Published 2010, the bare minimum level of carbon dioxide for plants, the minimum amount for them for their survival, is ranged between 50 to 170 parts per million. So million parts. So 50, 100. So that's what the plants need. I don't know what the actual percentage is of the 0.04, 0.03. But according to climate.gov, they said, even climate.gov, so the people who are supporting this climate crisis stuff, said, yes, there are natural sources of atmospheric carbon dioxide, such as outgassing from the ocean, decomposing vegetation, other biomass, venting volcanoes, naturally occurring wildfires, and even belches from ruminant animals. These natural sources of carbon dioxide are offset by sinks, things like photosynthesis by plants on land and in the ocean, direct absorption from the ocean, and the creation of soil and peat. So if our carbon in the air has risen, that means that it's not a bad thing. If we still have enough oxygen to breathe and our plants are still functioning, why are we concerned with the amount that's in the air, and why are we acting like it's a huge problem?
When you think about it, actually, it's as if like it's as if the atmosphere bear with me here, as if the atmosphere was as if a battery. and it's storing CO2 for the plant life that we're setting up for plant life to be even better.
Would it be like, if you're using the battery analogy, like overcharging a battery? Because the plants re-exchange the CO2 into just the C and the O2. They take the carbon dioxide out of the air and exchange it for oxygen. So if there's too much, then the plants can't do it. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying like, let's say I don't know where I'm going with this, but let's just say like normal is like 50%, right? 50% in battery changes. Let's just say that's normal. And right now it's right about like 80-90%.
Okay.
And if 50 is normal, and that's for like operating for trees or other plant life to be making photosynthesis, that we're setting up for trees and other plant life to function better.
I think I see what you're saying. The carbon dioxide doesn't necessarily cause the plants to grow better, but they can't grow if it's too low.
Right.
I've seen a study on this. So people are talking about deforestation. The amount of trees in the Amazon rainforest alone is enough trees to replace all the oxygen, or like to re-put oxygen in the air through the carbon dioxide from all the oxygen in the atmosphere, just through the one Amazon rainforest. Actually, so in talking about people who believe in the climate stuff, who can still admit that our carbon. So like this guy, or I'll just explain the story. So this guy, his name's Patrick Moore. He's a professor at Stanford University, and this is a quote that he had said in talking about climate change and the plants and the animals actually surviving. He said, beginning 450 million years ago, which as Christians we know would be false, but I like what he says here. He says, many marine species of invertebrates evolved the ability to control calcification to build armor plating to protect their soft bodies. Shellfish, such as clams and snails, corals, phytoplankton, and zooplankton, began to combine carbon dioxide with the calcium and thus remove carbon from their life cycle as cells shrank into sediments. The White Cliffs of Dover are made of their calcium carbonate skeletons. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere was reduced to about 90% during the last 150 million years. So even if the scale is correct there, so he says 540 million, he says 150 million. If those time scales are correct according to our 6,000 year timeline that we would think of, would 90%, if it used to be higher, then why are we saying it's a problem now? And then he continues, he says, if this trend continues, CO2 will inevitably fall to levels that threaten the survival of plants, which require a minimum of 150 ppm to survive, which you said before. If the plants die, all the animals, insects, and other invertebrates that depend on the plants for their survival will also die. So this guy believes in evolution. Even if we want to say that evolutionists do believe that the carbon emissions are still high or low, for example, they still admit that it's a problem either way. So they're saying it's a problem. I feel like this also could be one of those fake arguments where they're saying either way it's a problem just to get money. I don't know. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying a possible justification of sinful human beings. But I actually had a quote or a tweet. So Peter Sweden on Twitter said, "Would you support spraying chemicals in the air to block out the sun if the quote unquote experts said that it would prevent global warming?" Because there's actually a thing going around right now talking about artificially shading the earth to prevent global warming.
What?
Yeah, I don't know too much about it, but they're talking about using planes, which emit carbon gas as they fly, to like shade the earth. I don't know much about it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole thing about if you ever heard of cloud seeding?
Kind of, yeah.
So it's actually not like a new concept, but it's basically spraying chemicals in the air to try and induce clouds to form, which can bring rain and stuff. So yeah. But if you're using chemicals, that might be stuff like sulfur, which will make acid rain, which is not very good. And so a lot of people are talking about these days is the contrails from planes are just the government trying to do cloud seeding. And I seen how this can kind of tie into the global warming thing where this is how they're spreading chemicals to try and shade the earth with clouds.
Yeah, that's what I had
I don't
seen
know
stuff on.
if any of this is true. This is just what I've heard. But yeah.
This is completely new to me, guys.
Well, that's one thing. I think that the conception or the misconception we'll say there, of global warming is actually it is blown out of proportion for the common citizen today. Here's one. This is from Amuse on Twitter. They said, global warming, like headline. Democrats think CO2 causes earthquakes, and then it tags a post that says,
What?
I recently experienced my first earthquake in New Jersey. We never get earthquakes. The climate crisis is real. Weirdest experience ever. Then, Community Notes came in and said, New Jersey sits on a fault line. It has nothing to do with climate change.
I was gonna say, like, I wanna. If that's the case, I wanna know the science behind it.
Brian Lund on Twitter. So actually, the earthquake that just happened in New Jersey, New York, that just hit. This is Brian Lund on Twitter said, only a couple hours to connect today's earthquake to global warming. NBC4 New York says, a rare earthquake hits tri-state area. Can climate change make quakes more common? Experts weigh in. Earthquakes on the East Coast are rare, but sea levels rise and frequent flooding may lead to a higher frequency of quakes. But here's why you shouldn't be alarmed. Because it has nothing to do with climate change. And I guess here's another one from Amuse. Global warming. Everything causes global warming. Here's a thing from WW for USA. Now scientists are saying that wearing jeans is bad for the environment. Study reveals that wearing a pair just once is the equivalent to driving a car for 6.4 miles. Yep. So it is blown out of proportion, and I think we can all admit to that being true. The other thing that's blown out of proportion is supporting electric cars over gasoline or fossil fuel powered cars in our society. I don't know if you guys have any things to weigh in on about that.
So, in my opinion, I think changing the cars is not going to do anything because I'll just explain it like this. There's electric cars and there's gas cars, right? And the electric cars doesn't make CO2, but the gas cars does. So how I understand it is that gas cars ain't going to do anything because how is the gas cars or the electric cars getting their power from? They're getting their power plants, yeah. And the only way that electric cars are going to be effective is if you change the power plants themselves. So let's say like nuclear. Nuclear doesn't make any CO2 whatsoever. So having something like nuclear or even hydro or solar power even, if you have something that doesn't produce greenhouse gases or CO2 at all, then that's what the electric cars would be effective. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it doesn't change anything.
All of our infrastructure is built around fossil fuel power plants, and it is the most effective form. I'm a huge advocate for nuclear power, but our infrastructure is not set up to actually mandate off of nuclear power because we keep putting our money other places. And even with like Teslas, the batteries, there's been so many stories of like landfills that just have Teslas in them because the batteries are wearing out. We still don't have an effective way to actually store electricity to where it doesn't wear out because I think it's not the first law of thermodynamics, but one of the scientific laws, which is where, you can't have perpetual motion. So you always you'll always lose some amount of the energy no matter what. You might get 99% back, but that turns to 98 and then 97.
Right.
You can't keep something to 100%. The battery's going to wear out over time. We can't change that. And these solar panels, like they take up so much space, and these power plants, the coal is the only thing. I don't think coal's a finite resource. We keep acting like, and even when I saw this one meme when the Nike Airless basketball came out, and they're talking about why are we acting like air is a precious resource because like didn't have air,
right?
But this oil, we have so much oil that we could still have, or we could still use. Why are we have way more? We have bigger issues that we could be focusing on in our own country rather than what the oil versus the solar is doing. I don't know how to put it, but we should be focusing in other places rather than focusing on specifically the energy itself and making the cars.
Right. And going back to your point about oil and gas being a finite resource, it probably is, but we like you said, we have so much of it like especially in Alaska and northern Russia, there is so much oil there that even if we mined it all out and used it as much as we could, it'd be hundreds, maybe thousands of years before we used all of it.
And why would God put it there? I feel like God possibly could have a way that oil like, just resupplies. And because, I mean, the scientists aren't going to tell you that God has anything to do with it. But why would God put it on our earth if we were just going to run out of it eventually? If it wasn't, if it's like our society turned it necessary. Like maybe back in 2,000 years ago, they didn't use oil necessarily every single day to run all their machines. But now it's part of our everyday life.
Right. And even if in all that time that it'll take to, even if, like I said, if oil is a finite resource, by the time we use all of it up, we're going to have the technology where we're not even going to need it. Like we're going to have nuclear fusion. We're going to have thorium reactors. Like we're going to have the technology where we're not even going to need oil anymore.
And I mean, okay, yes, that could be very well and true. But in today's society, what say California mandating that they can't by 2035 they won't be selling gasoline powered cars in their state confines anymore. I'll just read a thing about that real quick. So on August 5th, 2022, California Air Resources Board approved a trailblazing Advanced Clean Cars No. 2 rule that sets California a path to rapidly growing zero-emission car, pickup, truck, and SUV market and deliver cleaner air and massive reductions in climate warming pollution. California's is the most aggressive regulation to establish a definitive mechanism to meet the required zero-emission vehicle sales that ramp up year over year, culminating in 100% zero-emission vehicle sales in 2035. So you cannot sell or buy a car that uses fossil fuel power by 2035. And that's why the fault line could break off of California at any moment, and I wouldn't be sad.
Exactly.
And, okay, whatever, and all jokes aside, but, like, we have our country, our infrastructure set up towards these fuels and the climate issue itself. I feel that we have bigger issues on our planet. Some of these issues I don't even necessarily think are true, but we have issues that we should be focusing on rather than like the well-being of our citizens rather than the well-being of the world that our citizens live in the air. Because it's not like our air's dirty. No. At least we're not China. We have things that we could be focusing on with our money, such as building, as we talked about in our last episode, building the border wall, or helping the homeless veterans off the street, or curing homelessness, or ending homelessness in general. But we're not putting our money there.
Yeah, and the point that I would say, as a Christian point of view, is like, I think God said, like, use this earth. Like, yes, we are supposed to take care of this earth.
We're put here to be stewards, yeah.
Yeah. But he also said, like, use the earth. Like, use the herbs that are grown on the ground. Use the plants that are given to you. That also includes fossil fuels. We are here to use what is on this earth. That includes fossil fuels, so we should use it. Though I could see people saying that it's a non-renewable resource, which depends on your viewpoint, I guess. But yeah, I'm a firm believer in using fossil fuels.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer in using what God created us to. And so I guess we can kind of close on that, is that the whole point of us being put here as God's creation, as God's stewards, as the leader of God's creation, is that we are here to steward his creation and to use what he gave us and fulfill our duty in the world through that.